Welcome to your Zone Leader Coordination. My name is Hillary and I will be providing your training session today. I am the Peterborough Pulse Coordinator and I'm very happy that you guys have signed up to take on this really important leadership role within Pulse. So without further ado, let's get started. So this year we've broken up our route into four zones. Zone 1 will be from Park Hill to London, Zone 2 will be from London to Brock, Zone 3 will be from Brock to Charlotte, and Zone 4 will include a small section of Charlotte and run from Charlotte to Sherbrooke along the George Street Strip. Morning check-in, depending on your schedule, is a very key time for a zone leader, and you want to be able to check in sharply at 7:45. There you'll be greeted by a committee member who will help you with your morning volunteer intake. Depending on where you've been stationed along the route will determine which info tent you go to for your morning check-in. If you're in the north end, you want to go to the London one, London Street info tent. If you're in the south end, closer to the downtown core, your check-in could very well be the Charlotte and George one. So from the info tent, groups will pair off into their designated zones. On event day, you will have a zone leader binder, which will include volunteer schedules, event maps, our emergency plan, along with committee, police, and other relevant contact details in the event that you're unable to connect with them over the radio. So all these resources will be made available to you. It's okay if you're not 100% through and through familiar with, say, the emergency plan, because you will also have a cheat sheet in your lanyard of what to do in case of an emergency. So those support systems will be there throughout the day. I also suggest that you go over your general training, which covers in more detail that emergency plan. And we will go from there. So afternoon check-in is 11:45. So if you're doing a full day, be aware of the time, because at 11:45 you need to be at that info tent, and if you're 3 blocks away, give yourself enough time to get to the info tent for 11:45. You may or may not have a committee member available to facilitate with your afternoon intake. Afternoon zone leaders will have a plethora of committee member support during teardown, but you may not have that initial intake committee member support. So once you arrive for check-in at 11:45, if you're doing the afternoon shift, make sure you pick up your zone leader binder located in the info tent, and you can use your volunteer schedule to figure out what volunteers will be there and signing in for your area. Give yourself from 11:45 to 12 to collect your volunteers. Any no-shows, let the booth attendant know so that if they come a little bit later, they can then meet you at your designated zone. We also want to inform a committee member of the no-show so that way we're made aware of it and we can hopefully fill in the volunteer gap. Event day communications, for the most part, as I said previously, will be through the form of a radio. In the event that you're unable to connect with us on radio, you can then use our secondary line, which is cell phone communications. Radio communications will be provided to zone leaders, committee members, police, and St. John's. So what is a zone leader? You're responsible for a lot of things, but for the most part, it's the operations taking place in your designated zone. You'll be supported throughout your shift by a committee member on and off for morning and end of day setup and tear down for the most part, and then checked in throughout the day by a committee member. You'll be able to coordinate volunteers, activities, and businesses. In the event that you have an issue with a volunteer or activity leader, please connect with myself on the radio. My name is Hillary, and I am the volunteer and activity leader designated contact. Any issue with businesses, we would like you to contact Terry Guile. He is our vice chair, and you can connect with him on the radio as well in the morning or in the afternoon or whenever you need to. So zone leadership is a lot of things, but your go-to resource. Please have a strong understanding of the event map and route. You will be given the map and route in your zone leader training, in your zone leader book, but please feel free to go over the event map throughout the day. You want to be as familiar with it as possible, and that includes the event route that's going, the activities and stuff that are going on outside of your designated zone. Because you may have participants that will come up to you and ask about where, let's say, the ukulele group is. And we would like for you to be able to provide that insight and knowledge. We would also like you to be familiar with our policy emergency plan, which will be located in your event binder, as well as a few little cheat sheets in your lanyard. Also be knowledgeable of all the volunteer roles and responsibilities. Like, for instance, Root Rabbits are responsible for passing messages, providing breaks as need be, and they're also going to be that go-to person for sending any sort of communications you need to send out to your volunteers within your zone. So don't be afraid to connect with that volunteer to do that specific activity. You also want to ensure that they're fulfilling their roles. Sometimes a volunteer might not be best suited for a designated task, and it's okay to pivot them to another role as long as that role is then being fulfilled by another volunteer better suited. You want to be able to direct and assist with setup and teardown. Depending on your area, you may have an info tent, and that setup activity is quite intensive. There's a lot of signage and things that need to be set up and erected before 9 a.m. You will have your info tent checklist to sort of guide you along the way, but it's very key that we have our info tents 100% set up by 9 a.m. Activity tents will be scattered throughout the route, but there are a grouping of activity leaders, 20 or so, that will be borrowing activity tents from GreenUp that are Trent branded. The way that we've decided to coordinate this is that every block will have a rest station, and that rest station will have a drop-up of tents depending on if there's an activity leader, 2 or 3, that is borrowing them. They can pick them up there. It's their responsibility to set it up. If the activity leader is unable to set it up themselves, definitely lend a helping hand or designate some volunteers to help them. Rest stations will need a bit of setup duties and teardown duties. And you'll also have to help with activities throughout the day. If there is an activity leader that just needs to take a quick break and they don't have anybody to relieve them, be sure to facilitate that and touch base with your barricaders at setup and teardown. We want to make sure that the barricaders, for the most part, are set up in the morning in the place that they're supposed to be and on time. And if they are unable to fulfill their duties, that's something we need to know, because there must always be a barricader in their zone. We also want to make sure that those barricaders stay erected until they have been given permission by a Pulse committee member to tear down. We also are going to be overseeing the locations and setup details on the event day. And with that, you always want to refer to your activity map. That will help you navigate where activity leaders need to be if they're unable to recall their designated zone. You're going to be on-site problem solving for the most part throughout the day, but you'll also be lending that leadership support to the folks that are volunteering in your zone. Be that go-to person in an emergency situation. Be aware of how to contact the St. John's ambulance volunteers via radio communications, and understand communication lines in emergency situations. Communicate issues with other zone leaders, Pulse coordinator, and Pulse chair as needed. So one main duty is that leadership presence, and ensure that at least one zone leader or committee member is present at all times. If you need a break, let a Root Rabbit know and they can flag down a committee member to relieve you. Communicate and coordinate with volunteers and activity leaders throughout the day as needed, and organize a head count check. Head count checks are extremely important to Peterborough Pulse for evaluation purposes, and we have devised that these checks will take place periodically throughout the day at 10 a.m., 12 p.m., and 2 p.m., and it will be the Root Rabbit's role to cycle along that 3-block radius and count how many people are there, and collect that data for us to use in our evaluation of the event. I'll be reminding people of these head count checks, so not to worry if you slip up and forget that it's 10:02. Zone duties during event. Empower volunteers to take breaks. It may be a really hot event day, and sometimes volunteers don't take breaks, and we want them to know that they are empowered to do so, and just simply by reminding them will help us make sure that those volunteers are looking after themselves appropriately. And communicate with the Route Rabbit and other zone leaders as needed. You want to be able to answer participant questions. So again, referring back to that zone leader book, refer to the map if there isn't an info tent within sight to be able to help participants find the activities that they want to participate in, and or washroom areas, and or parking areas. There are places that are located on the map that you might not be familiar with because it's not directly in your zone, so always refer to that map. And in the event that you don't have map access, you can always refer that participant back to an info tent. It's better to give correct information than false, so when you don't know, definitely be the first one to acknowledge that and direct them to a committee member and or info tent. So additional personnel that will be stationed along the route will be police. St. John's Ambulance will have three volunteers, and they'll be stationed along the route in key areas marked on the map. We also have a pulse coordinator and organizers scattered throughout the day between zones. So again, for setup, you want to sign in at either 7:45 or 11:45 to begin your zone leader activity duties. Check the barricades if reported for your morning shift, that they're there in their designated locations by 8:30 a.m. Review volunteer schedule to ensure correct volunteer barricades have arrived. And communicate no-shows to Pulse committee members. Now the team. Each zone will have an assigned zone team, and it may shift from one area to the next, but for the most part there'll be a committee member in and out throughout the day, primarily there for setup and tear down. Yourself, a zone leader, a Route Rabbit, 2 info booth attendants if you're located in an info booth zone, a road team crew, feedback collectors, and 2 merrymakers. So the day for setup will kind of follow this sort of timeline. From 8 a.m. to 8:45, you're going to assist activities with setup as needed, guide activity leaders and their businesses to their designated locations, refer to our route map and activity list for details, ensure all activity leaders are set up within their space restrictions as noted on the map. So if one group has a small little square designated to them for their space and they begin to take up a 30-foot stretch, that's something we want to be aware of. We also want to be aware of groups that are setting up beyond the 10-foot from the curb space restriction. We try to keep the streets open for active play and transportation. And the way to visualize that 10-foot from the curb would be to visualize it as a parking space in terms of width. We want to keep them within that 10 by 10. There have been some groups that have requested additional space, and we've accommodated that on the map. So info tent. If you happen to be in an info tent area, you'll have your info tent assistants helping you erect the tent materials and set all of that jazz up in the morning. You'll have an event kit at the info tent, and you'll also have an info tent checklist of all the things that need to be on display, like our sponsorship signage, our event map signage. We'll also need to have a cooler with drinks in there. So you want to go through that checklist if the info tent is in your zone and make sure that it's being erected properly and that it has all of the items listed in that info tent checklist available and ready and erected on time and in its right place. You want to ensure that that info tent is completely set up by no later than 15 minutes before our 9 a.m. Pulse start time. So vehicle removal will play a key role in setup for zone leaders that will be partaking in their morning shift. So identify any parked cars along the route that are not affiliated with Pulse. Keep note of that and let either myself or another Pulse committee member be aware of this parked vehicle. And all vehicles that are parked on the Pulse route will be towed to the Brock Street parking lot free of charge. So if you get somebody coming into the event saying, you know, my car was towed, what the heck's going on, you can always let them know that they will be at the Brock Street parking lot and that they have not been charged for said towing. Ensure all vehicles are off the route no later than 8:25 and notify the Pulse chair of any remaining vehicles that will need to be towed. So, vehicle removal. Instruct activity leaders to drop off equipment park off-site, and then return on foot for setup. That is very key for when activity leaders are coming onto the route with a vehicle, and it can only be accomplished in that order. So when they come to set up, have them drop off all of their items that they need to set up, and then park off-site. Because by 8:30 a.m., all vehicles have to be off the route, and at 8:15, it's a good time to start reminding them of the vehicle deadline. Tear down. So at 2:30, yourself, along with Route Rabbits, will notify participants and activity leaders and volunteers alike that Pulse is almost ending and there's 30 minutes until it is over. Activity leaders will not be granted vehicle access for tear down until 3:15. We create that gap so that activity leaders are not tearing down before the event, and we also want to make sure that all of our participants are off the route before we start allowing vehicle access back onto the route. At 3 o'clock, assist with info tent teardown if it's in your area. If not, a secondary task will be to take down all route decoration and instruct volunteers to dismantle and move all rest area items and move off to the side of the road. So rest area items would be the picnic table and the tree. Move it to the side of the road for later pickup. We don't want it inhibiting any vehicle access once the route becomes made available at 4 p.m. So at 3 p.m., instruct volunteers to collect Pulse signage and decoration along the route. And any Pulse-related decor will be collected, and then have one volunteer drop it off to the closest info tent for later pickup. Recruit volunteers to assist with activity leaders and businesses for teardown. Again, we want to have everything off the route by 4 p.m., so it is a community effort. And be sure to delegate support where needed. And any AL or businesses that are borrowing tents, once they have torn down their tent, just request that they put them off to the side of the curb, so that our committee members will be able to pick them up by the end. From 3 to 4, all borrowed activity leader tents are being dismantled correctly. That is something that needs to be monitored, and make sure that there's the right amount of people tearing down a tent. They're borrowed tents, and we definitely don't want them to be, improperly torn down. We want to make sure that its integrity is intact when we return them. And once an activity is dismantled, dismantle the request to provide support or to move the tent to the side for the road for later pickup. So you want to make sure that it's either moved by the activity leader themselves or have a volunteer move it off the road for them. So 3:30 to 4, still kind of, it's like a very fluid timeline, but you want to make sure that everyone is off the route. The committee members will notify barricades and road team members when it's safe to remove barricades from the center street. Barricade removals will happen systematically from south to north, ending in Park Hill. And we do that systematic dismantlement so that vehicle access won't start taking place until the entire route has been secured and shut down.